If you've been trying to optimize your short term rental, you're probably running it like a real business, and at some point, you probably started taking direct bookings. You built a website, you developed some repeat guests, and you moved a share of your revenue off of Airbnb and Vrbo. That is one of the clearer signs that a host is treating the property as a business rather than as a side activity, and it is almost always a good decision. It's also one of the most common places we see coverage gaps quietly open up in an operation. And the reason isn't obvious, which is part of the problem. Nothing about the operation feels different the day that you took your first direct booking. The property's the same, and the guest is the same. But underneath the surface, something meaningful just changed, and most policies were never updated to match it. That is what we're going to walk through today. I'm Cody with Threshold STR. If you've been watching our videos for a while, you may have noticed that we've been quiet for a bit. That's because we've been building on the operational side of the business. One of the things that I was thinking about that I realized I never really shared is that we are fully licensed to place short-term rental insurance for hosts as well as property managers, in addition to the risk advisory work that we've been doing all along. So going forward, we can help both with identifying gaps and with actually placing the coverage that fills them. We have more content like this coming on a regular cadence, so let's get into today's topic. So when a guest books your property through Airbnb or Vrbo, you receive two things at once. The first one is obvious. You get a reservation with the payment processing handled by the platform and a verified guest of record on the booking. The second thing you receive is easier to forget about because it requires no action from you and it shows up in no line item on the reservation. Riding along with every platform booking is a layer of platform protection branded as AirCover on Airbnb or the host guarantee on Vrbo. That sits quietly behind the stay. There is a legitimate debate, as we've talked about on our channel, about how strong the platform protection actually is. We've made the argument in other videos that it is thinner than the marketing suggests, particularly when it comes to ordinary negligence and the claims process itself. But thin is not the same as absent. For platform booking, there at least is something there. And many hosts have been quietly relying on that something as part of their coverage without actually ever naming it. Now, this might sound obvious, but a direct booking is a transaction that platform was never a part of. That one simple fact removes the entire platform protection layer from this stay. Not a reduced version of it, the entire thing. The damage protection does not apply, and the liability backstop does not apply. The identity verification that the platform ran on the guest usually, the payment dispute mechanism, and the after-the-fact support structure are all going to be gone. None of it attaches to a booking that Airbnb or Vrbo never processed directly. The guest who books directly from your website or through your referral is, from a coverage standpoint, in a completely different category than the guest who books that exact same property through an app or software, Airbnb or Vrbo, etc. Most experienced hosts understand that this at the surface level when we bring it up in an audit, but the exposure comes from the assumption that quietly follows it, which is that their own insurance policy simply steps into the space that the platform used to occupy. Sometimes it does step in, sometimes it does not, and the difference is rarely visible until something does happen. Now, here's the part of this that surprises most hosts, because it has almost nothing to do with the booking channel, and it has everything to do with how the policy was underwritten in the first place. A lot of short-term rental policies were quoted at the beginning with platform activity as the assumed model. The agent asked you how the property was being rented, and the host or you said Airbnb. The policy was then built around that description. Well, sometimes there were assumptions baked into the underwriting that were never explained to the host in plain language. The operation was understood as platform-based, and the platform's own protections were silently doing part of the work in the background. Then the operation changed. The host added direct bookings or moved a meaningful share of the revenue off platform, and the policy stayed exactly as it was the day it was issued. The underwriting picture and the actual operation slowly drifted apart from each other. That drift is one of the most common ways coverage gaps form in STR operations. They rarely come from a single obvious bad decision. They come from an operation that evolved over time while the policy underneath it stood still. Now, I want to be clear, a properly written short-term rental commercial liability policy generally does not care where the guest came from. It covers the business activity of renting the property to paying guests, regardless of the channel. That is exactly the kind of policy that you want and that we can help set you up with. The issue is that a large share of hosts are not actually on that kind of policy. They think they are. They're probably on a homeowner's policy with a short-term rental endorsement, or a landlord policy that they were told would handle the rental, or maybe a personal residential policy that was never designed for paying guests at all. Those policies often carry exclusions that have nothing to do with the booking channel and everything to do with running a business out of the property. The platform protection was quietly masking that exclusion the whole time, and direct bookings removes the mask. So let's walk through what this actually looks like when it happens. So picture a host in a four-season mountain market who has built a strong direct booking operation. They have a clean website, they have repeat guests, and a property that performs across all 4 seasons. That's the kind of operation that other hosts in the area actually study and want to replicate. One of the direct bookings is from the summertime, and it's a family with 2 children. During the stay, one of their kids falls on an exterior staircase where the railing was loose. It starts as what seems like a minor injury, and over the next few weeks, it becomes a series of medical visits and then a specialist referral. A few weeks after that, a demand letter arrives at the host's home, and the family alleges that the railing was a known maintenance issue and that they are seeking damages for the injury and for ongoing treatment. The demand is roughly $185,000. Talk about a letter to get in the mail. The host's first instinct is the common one. Oh, there's insurance in place, and somewhere in the back of his mind, the platform's liability protection had always felt like kind of the safety net if something serious ever happened. But the stay never touched the platform, so there is no platform liability to call on at all. That number available from that source is 0. That leaves the host's own policy, which turns out to be a landlord policy that excludes the commercial guest activity that was actually taking place on the property. The carrier does not deny the claim in bad faith. It denies it because the activity that produced the loss falls outside what the policy was built to cover in the first place. The deductible does not matter. The policy limit does not matter. The coverage for that specific loss liability is just not there. The case eventually settles for below that original demand, but the host pays for it out of their own defense and a meaningful share of the settlement out of the host's own pocket. The final out-of-pocket number lands somewhere in the mid-5 figures on top of the year of stress and distraction from all of that. So the way that I would frame all of this is that channel and coverage are 2 different decisions, and hosts tend to kind of blur them together in a way that creates exactly this kind of gap we're talking about. The first decision is your booking channel. That is a business decision about fees, control, and guest relationships. Going direct is, like I said, frequently the right call, and none of what I'm saying here argues against it. The second decision is your liability and property coverage. That should respond to loss based on what actually happened at the property, not based on which website or platform sent the guest to you in the first place. If your coverage only holds when the platform is involved in the transaction, then you don't really have coverage. What you have is an arrangement that has been working out so far because the platform layer kept absorbing what your own policy was quietly excluding. When those 2 decisions are properly aligned, direct bookings is exactly the upgrade its advocates actually describe. There's better margins, better guest relationships, and a real policy underneath that responds regardless of your channel. Now, none of this calls for alarm. What it does call for is just one conversation and a few minutes with your own paperwork. I want you to ask your agent a very specific question. Not just whether you're covered, but whether your policy responds to a guest injury or a property loss the same way, regardless of whether the booking came through a platform or directly from you. Ask them to a point where you point to the exact specific language in the policy that supports the answer that they give you. If they cannot point you to that language, that's essentially your answer. Then, pull your declarations page and confirm what kind of policy you're actually on. A homeowner's policy with an endorsement, a landlord policy, or a true commercial short-term rental policy. Those are 3 very different documents, and if you're running direct bookings on anything other than a purpose-built short-term rental policy, that's worth resolving before your next direct guest checks in. And finally, stop counting the platform protection as part of your coverage stack. Look only at what your own policy would actually pay if a guest were injured tomorrow on a stay that Airbnb or Vrbo never processed. If that number makes you uncomfortable, you just found the specific thing that you need to fix. Now let's be clear. Direct bookings is not the risk here. The risk is changing how you operate while leaving the coverage underneath the operation untouched. The host who gets caught by this are not the ones that are running direct bookings. They're the ones who evolved the business and they never updated the policy to match what they're actually doing. If you take direct bookings or you're thinking about starting, it's worth confirming that your own policy responds regardless of how that guest arrived at your door. Our free risk score at thresholdstr.com walks through where specific exposure is, and channel independence is one of the questions that we look at directly. And again, because we're fully licensed on the placement side as well, we can help with identifying the gap and with actually filling it for you. If you found this useful, please subscribe. We have more content coming like this again soon. Take care.